Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. This afternoon is a special afternoon. We have with us in our virtual meeting room, or let's say lecture room. For the last 10 weeks, we've been having virtual lectures with Mr. Ako, and this afternoon we are privileged to have Mr. Henao with us. And our topic for this afternoon is faith-based diplomacy, PNG and Israel bilateral relations. And I'll give you a brief about our guest speaker this afternoon. Mr. Henao holds a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Papua New Guinea Law School. He began his career in private practice before joining the Department of Justice and Attorney General in its International Law Division, where he gained deep expertise in the legal and operational frameworks of international trade, investment, and policy development. His work brought him into contact with major global bodies such as the World Trade Organization, WTO, European Union, the Melanesian Spearhead Group, leading to roles at the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat and later as an analyst with the Institute of National Affairs, PNG. He also earned a diploma in trade negotiations from the WTO Secretariat. In 2012, he became Executive Director of the Business Council of PNG, spearheading policy development and government industry dialogue, before serving as an advisor to the PNG APEC Business Council. In 2022, he founded Legacy Group, and I'm sure many of you have seen his work on different social media platforms, especially LinkedIn. And a consultancy. So the Legacy Group is basically a consultancy specializing in government to business engagement and geopolitical investment. He currently holds directorships with Finance Corporation Limited and Central Dairy Limited, and serves as a chairman of Waigani Jerusalem Center. Mr. Henao has also served as chairman of Digital Foundation, a director of Transparency International, and has been appointed by the National Cabinet to the Eminent Persons Group, drafting PNG's foreign policy white paper. So without further delay, I will now hand over the virtual microphone to Mr. Henao, and we'll have the Q&A session after his presentation.
Okay.
Please, Mr. Henao, go ahead. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernard, and truly appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today. Do I have, oh, I do. I've got access to sharing the screen. Okay. So what I thought would be, can you all see my screen? Yep. Okay, fantastic. So what I thought would be useful today in terms of dialogue is, especially a subject of this magnitude, is to look at some fundamentals on when it comes to faith-based diplomacy and in particular the relationship with Israel. The prevailing theme is one of culture wars, and that is the space that international relations on faith on Israel is currently being played out. And understanding what is the culture war, it will then allow us to understand where do the subject of Israel, the subject of faith, is situated. I'll then have a broader conversation on the two particular parts of the culture war, which on one end is the left wing, and I'll specifically talk about the spiritual driver of the left wing is the critical race theory, and how critical race theory manifests into the political subject of intersectionality. And then on the opposing side is the right side of politics, where the spiritual foundation of the right wing is the Judeo-Christian values. And where does the Judeo-Christian values then situate itself in the pro-Israel agenda? So much of my conversations on section 2 and 3 will be derived from the current observations that permeate right across the different parts of the world on this subject. I'll zone in on America, Australia as reference points, and even for further clarity, where is Israel situated in this left and right culture war space? And then more importantly, bringing it back into the Papua New Guinea space. What is the reality of PNG when we talk about culture wars? And we'll look at a specific, we'll look at the tenets of the rich Black Christian nation that Prime Minister Marape has made a central part of his prime ministership, his identity, and where does that actually situate itself in the culture wars? Then I think what would be important is to look at a case study on Marape's pro-Israel agenda. I was heavily involved in my organization on the opening of the Jerusalem embassy, and there were elements of that faith-based diplomacy that played out, which would make a good reference point on what I would have spoken on topics 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the final part is just to circle off some high-level observations from my time with my colleagues in the Eminent Persons Group writing the foreign policy. Where do we see the next journey for Papua New Guinea should be situated? And what are the key elements of that strategy going forward? So a big part of that would be introducing all of you to the fulcrum modality that's been promoted by my colleagues and I in drafting the foreign policy. Okay, so jumping in, it's important to recognize on the outset that we're in a season of extremes. On one end, there's a far left composition of power, of ideology, of drive, and there is a far right drive on ideology, on resourcing. So the real politic is situated in these two extremes, and governments that are being elected into power, they're largely getting elected in these extreme spaces. So what used to traditionally be left out on the fringes, they're now becoming increasingly mainstream. 20, 30 years ago, everything was in the center. There was this culture but basically there was this culture of trying to be pragmatic and using elements of left-wing, right-wing politics to get things going. So there was a sense of pragmatism, and centrist was a critical part of where things were moving. But then what's happened over the years is the more that people started becoming left of the center, the right of the center happened, and so forth, until we're now at a place where centrist type governments, centrist type views are not the prevailing circumstance. And we'll look into those left and right features in the coming slides, but the important point to note in this particular conversation is that we are now in extreme left, extreme right in politics, in leadership, in ideology. There's no appetite for any type of centrist view. And this is a direct example that domestic systems have now become not only mainstream in the domestic environment, but they have now become significantly impactful in the international sphere or in the power projection of international relations. And because that's been the circumstance, domestic priorities and systems are now the overriding interest over international consensus. And that's an important development that we're in right now. When I was actively involved in international relations and international law in the early 2000s, we were largely going into negotiations, forums, engagements with a centrist type of view. We wanted to look at the international order, the international system, whether it was the multilateral trading system in trade or the environmental agreements, the multilateral environmental agreements. There was this huge appetite that the rules-based systems were the ones that were going to guide us into prosperity. It was going to guide us into engagements, and we were able to forge stronger relationships. That is not the case right now, because the domestic power structures and systems of mainly the larger nations such as America and China, and even regional powers, they're now all opting into a system that's not entirely driven by international rules-based, but their domestic projections to influence and even impact international rules-based. So that's an important piece of the puzzle that I just wanted to highlight, that we are now in that era. We're now living that era of culture wars are a primary force impacting international relations. Whether that's a good thing or not a good thing, that's up for debate. But fundamentally, this is where we are situated right now. So I just want to move on to left-wing ideology, and one of the key reasons why this is important to appreciate is because we cannot talk about faith-based diplomacy if we don't know the opposition of faith-based diplomacy. We can't talk about Israel if we don't know the movement that's against Israel. So it's important to understand where those opposition views stem from and what are the real drivers of these views. So critical race theory was born out of intellectuals in America, and their viewpoint was institutionalized racism was so prevalent and pervasive in everything in government, the full construct of the government, whether it was the Founding Fathers' Constitution, the judiciary, public service, business, all of that is by design institutionalizing racism. So if you subjugate and you live under that particular system, then the theory of CRT indicates that you have a colonial, you have a slavery mindset, that you are entrapped by these institutions. And because you are trapped by these institutions, the colonial system in this case is the institutions, the arms of government, markets, everything. So that theory then states that the only way to reverse institutionalized racism, to decolonize the mindset, is to, number one, either destroy it, or number two, periodically apply affirmative action strategies and programs, or in America, they call it the DEI, diversity, inclusiveness. I forgot what the E is. But the whole idea of that particular process is it's going after chunks of institutions that CRT identifies as institutionalized racism. And we'll get into some examples on what that looks like in a moment. But the main message there is this is devoid of meritocracy. In other words, your standards and qualifications of becoming degree holders, working based on your grades and your programs, none of that matter because the institution is colonial in nature and suppressive in nature. So instead, it replaces it with race-based quotas. We will have 30% Blacks to work here, irrespective of grades. We want that quota to be filled. So you're not getting your top A's, but you're probably getting your C and D's. So this is the elements of CRT. Now, that particular theory and the spirituality of CRT, it manifests into the politics of intersectionality. And intersectionality basically looks at all of different movements that promote CRT coming together. So, for example, the Black Lives Movement, it advocates for non-racism, for the promotion of Blacks. It promotes affirmative action, DEI, primarily because it believes that the police, the government, the judges, everything is racist. So BLM aims to pursue a CRT DEI type system. The LGBTQI has a similar type of movement where it moves into a place where critical race theory promotes the concept that you need us to get into these institutions because it's inherently anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ. So they all converge. They all converge. And surprisingly, the phenomenon that's gripped us for the past 2 years is the global jihad movement is also seen as a major CRT in the family of intersectionality, largely because the left has defined the global jihad movement as an anti-colonial movement. They're trying to destroy Western ideals because it is suppressive, it's racist, it doesn't promote diversity. So that and that demonstrates to you that intersectionality is quite malleable, it's quite flexible in bringing all of these sorts of parties into the space. So just some quick examples of what I've mentioned, and then we'll move on to the right wing. So you will see intersectionality perfectly manifested in the anti-Israel protests, the pro-Palestinian protests. You will see LGBTQI advocates, you will see Black Lives Matter advocates, and you will also see global jihad activists as well. They're all meshed into this intersectionality block. And the overriding theory, the overriding desire, the spiritual connection is because of this CRT concept that binds them together. In terms of political manifestations on who is the left and their global views, Mandami, who is a candidate for the New York mayor, AOC, who's a very, very leading politician in the Democrats, who's also from New York in America. And we're beginning to see large parts of the Democrat Party becoming more and more and more into the intersectionality CRT space. And more of them are moving away from the centrists into that area. And of course, what's known as the squad, Rashida and Ilhan Omar, and they also are in the far left of American politics. In Australia, the clearest manifestation of the CRT intersectionality group would be the Greens Party of Australia. They're very, very far left in their views, and they promote this sort of political theory, political ideology. So I just want to move into the right-wing side of our conversations, and then start talking about the pro-Israel agenda. So the spiritual foundation of the right wing of politics are conservative values. In terms of economics, they believe in a limited government, whereas the left believe in a larger government. There's a greater emphasis on free enterprise, but fundamentally, it's all about the pursuit of individual freedom. And this is a fundamental core of Judeo-Christian values, where the pursuit of freedom, the pursuit of individual freedom, and in Christian beliefs, it's not the church that'll take you to heaven. It's you, your deeds, your good deeds. So that manifests into the political place when you look at the desire of the conservatives and the right wing is to have this pursuit of individual freedom and a limited government. Now, the bedrock of all of this, as I mentioned, is Judeo-Christian values. And this is the foundation of the movement. Sorry. Just trying to see my notes, excuse me. Yeah, so it's the foundation of the movement, and primarily it embodies itself in the history of the Western civilization. It came from the Middle East, it came from Jerusalem, all of the things that we read in the Bible, and then these pursuits evolved into classical Roman expansion. It then evolved further into the institutions of democracy and into what we now know. So that particular Judeo-Christian value, they're very, very proud of the history that brought freedom They're very, very proud of the fact that it was this movement that created so much prosperity. And this is the group that protects it and promotes it. Now, the pro-Israel movement is an embodiment of Judeo-Christian values, primarily because Jerusalem in particular is seen as the embodiment on where the pursuit of freedom, the pursuit of salvation, it is where government systems were first evolved, created. It was where significant changes were brought into transactions and things like that. So the physical land of Jerusalem is a representation of this 3,000-year civilization that brought these sorts of changes. The people are also an important factor in the Judeo-Christian movement, particularly the Jewish people. So we're now transcending into a movement that's takes the literal interpretations of the Bible. These are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A particular scripture that the pro-Israel movements use is Genesis 12:3. Those that bless Israel will be blessed. Those that curse Israel will be cursed. So that's another critical element of why the pro-Israel movement is situated in the right side of politics. And then finally, the culture itself. And I use the word culture broadly, but specifically the religious culture that of monotheism, the single God, the construct of the faith, and also the Bible generally. So what all of this tries to achieve here is, and I hope this gives you the picture that on one end, the right side of politics promotes this Western-led Judeo-Christian values that the pro-Israel agenda is a central part of. And on the left side of politics, it promotes a complete disruption and destruction on what has been around for 3,000 years. And it's a resistance movement that's trying to rip it out and create a more intersectional, community of people. So I don't want to get into the political theories of this, but effectively, this is a socialism construct, the left, and then what you have with the right is a capitalist construct. But the theory of those have really, really gone into different extremes, and this is where we are situated right now. So I just want to give you some PNG insights on where I observe those ideologies and how they actually play in PNG's political reality, and where does it actually situate itself in foreign relations. So if I start off with left-wing ideals, significant amount of aid programs, even some of the government initiatives that these aid programs drive, they have a left-leaning type of ideology. For example, I'm sure many of you know JETSI. It's a general order in the national government promoting gender equality, diversity and things like that. That is a concept that was permeated out of international relations. It was evolved out of left-leaning intellectuals that made its way into the UN, and then subsequently we brought those components into the government sector. Similarly, in the private sector, they have what's known as ESG, environmental, social, governance provisions or standards. And in the ESG, there are also similar components of left-leaning ideals permeating into the private sector. Women have certain privileges, disability provisions, and child protection. So these are the sorts of systems that we see playing out into the PNG market. Again, correctly, there are certain concepts that will find difficulty having PNG linkages. For example, our Christian values. It will make it very difficult for LGBTQI promotion to happen in Papua New Guinea. So JETC and ESG remain very, very quiet on these provisions. But nonetheless, this movement has a huge infrastructure on moving these into Papua New Guinea. Now, are there Papua New Guinean-based organizations that promote left-wing ideals? And yes, the answer is yes. This is not just imported. We also have organizations that promote these ideals. and there are NGOs, there are CSOs that look through the lens of critical race theory. They look through the lens of intersectionality, and they advocate their provisions for government policy and for change. When we look at right-wing ideals in Papua New Guinea, it's very prevalent that those ideals are a bedrock in the current administration's values. Prime Minister Marape, when he came into office in 19, he wanted to make a rich Black Christian nation, and he's actually augmented much of the public sector to drive towards this agenda. He talks about the 100 billion kina mark of the market that he wants to create. He's well on his way there. These are his words, not mine. Every budget session, he talks about moving towards 100 billion kina economy. So that rich Black side of it. And on that Christian side of it, earlier this year in March, the proclamations that came out of our Constitution, the declarations that came out of our Constitution, also indicate a significant implementation of right-wing values. The Bible is now a Papua New Guinea identity, just like your flag. The Constitution has now recognized the Bible is a Papua New Guinea identity. So the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's now a Papua New Guinea identity. The Constitution has also declared that we are a Christian nation, and the Constitution has also declared that the practices of Christianity are mainstream in the PNG, way of life. So the supreme law of the nation has augmented into a right-wing scenario. So I just want to move on to centrist ideals. So as I told you, when I was a lawyer for the International Law Division, we would always look at the rules-based order as our foundation on engaging globally and regionally and bilaterally. Increasingly, rules-based orders are becoming secondary to an entirely new architecture that's driven domestically by our bilateral partners. So, so what you're beginning to see is the centrist ideals that were highly efficient in my time, even way back in the 90s and even the earlier parts of our independence in the 80s. Many of those centrist ideals are now a secondary consideration. And I'll give you a classical example. When constructing you know, for example, regional pacts such as APEC, we've been unable to move into a comprehensive economic agreement, largely because the differences doesn't allow us. So what that means is, because we can't integrate as a region, we're now cutting deals in different groupings to enhance our areas of interest. Using international law as the basis, but we're going deeper and extreme. And it's also beginning to cut into other parts of foreign relations. It's not international trade anymore. It's now tagged to a security pact. It's now tagged into a whole lot of other domestic considerations. So more and more, the centrist ideals are beginning to wane. And I guess the best manifestation I can provide is, friend to all, enemy to none is universalism, but fundamentally it is a centrist ideology. It's meant to say that we agree, and we have a minimum standard of living together. Right now, that concept doesn't apply to a large degree because of the polarization that we're in. So I just want to probably come towards the end of my talk, and we can get to some QA. When I look at a case study about faith-based diplomacy, the Marape pro-Israel agenda is an interesting starting point. So there was a Judeo-Christian agenda that drove a presence in Israel. Israel has no natural resources for us to sell out gas or other items, or even transact things back here. It's a small country, and purely looking at it from a goods point of view, they don't have manufacturing capabilities to transform any of our commodities. In terms of services, yes, they do have technological advancements in agri-tech and so forth, but can that be a compelling point of view that makes it critical to have a presence and a relationship in Israel? So it's not an economic consideration. This was a Judeo-Christian agenda that drove us to open the embassy in Israel. Now, what was interesting was when it was becoming very clear that the embassy was going to open, very, very senior Foreign Service officials, they advised against the Prime Minister to open the embassy in Jerusalem, primarily because their centrist views indicated that Jerusalem was a conflicted zone. And we should follow the rest of the world in opening our embassy in Tel Aviv because of the contest that existed. But again, Prime Minister's overwhelming Judeo-Christian agenda made that decision that it's not going to be Tel Aviv, the embassy will open in Jerusalem. Now, there were PNG officials, churches, other groups in Papua New Guinea that were against this because they held the intersectionality view that opening the embassy in Jerusalem or having a relationship with Israel is in violation of the gross human rights abuses that was happening in Gaza and in the West Bank, and basically promoting the Palestinian narrative of victimhood. So what this slide indicates to you is we have a prime minister that's very, very deep into the Judeo-Christian agenda, and he would push and he would pursue not only the opening of the embassy, but the voting on the UN is very, very pro-Israel, largely because of this worldview that him and his cabinet hold. So I just want to end with two main observations. Observation number one, when my colleagues and I furnished our report to Foreign Minister Chechenko, we promoted the concept of the fulcrum to replace the friend to all, enemy to none, and even the selective engagement strategy. And the fulcrum is basically a kind of like a pole, and it swings based on the national, or it swings based on what the national interest is. And so our view was, in order for the fulcrum to swing, the base of the fulcrum, it needs to know exactly what the national interest is. So for example, if the maintenance and the survival of Judeo-Christian values is our national interest, okay? Because of Christianity, people aren't going around creating, mass killings and all sorts of things. Judeo-Christian values is pacifying that. If that is such an important value, then its maintenance, survival, and sustenance, we need to hold that important to us. The people that are keepers of that Judeo-Christian value, whether they're Catholics, they're Lutherans, SDAs, these are the people that we need to allow to continue helping us build these institutions to maintain that stability. So the fulcrum will swing into those countries. For example, the birthplace of SDA is in America. What state in America, has SDAs? Can we attract, that value system here? Or the Mormons in Utah, or the Germans in Lutheran, or the London Mission Society in Britain, and so forth. CRC churches in Australia, Pentecostals. Can we swing into those communities? Can we swing into those nations? Can we swing into their economies and then bring their values, their people to invest in Papua New Guinea? So that's the fulcrum observation. I don't think the friend to all, enemy to none, it's become redundant. That's a centrist, as I mentioned, that's a centrist view that is completely inappropriate in our current circumstance. We're now living in the extremes of left and right. Now, the fulcrum allows us to swing to the left for this particular piece, come back out, swing to the right for this particular piece, come back out, and so forth. And that's where the foreign relations need to have more emphasis around in defining national interest. So yes, thank you, Bernard. Thank you, everyone. That's my thoughts on the subject that was given. I hope that provided some insights to all of you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Henao, for a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. You've really I believe for the students, it's mind-opening for them. Now they're understanding the different. I think they didn't go too much into the political spectrum argument. So it's good that you're giving them the spectrum so they know the left from the right and they can differentiate. Let me just give you a brief explanation about the composition of the class. The class is made up of year 4 students from the communication journalism department and our department, the PNG and International Studies department. So we have journalism students in year 4 will be graduating and going out into the field soon, and we have our year 4 students, international relations and PNG studies. So the questions that they will ask or comments that they will make will help you determine the type of background they're coming from or the area of study.
Sure,
So
sure.
we will go into the Q&A now. Unless Mr. Ako, you want to say something before we open the floor?
All good. We go straight to Q&A. It was very interesting.
Yes.
Let's go straight to
thank
Q&A.
you. All right, so we'll begin with Amy. Amy is our first attendee. There was a question, I believe, questions and comments for Mr. Henao. Amy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Yagiora. Good afternoon, Mr. Henao, and thank you for your insightful presentation and for making time to be with us today. I'm Amy Wedis, a final year communication arts student here at Divine Word University, and I really appreciate the perspective on faith-based diplomacy. Without further ado, I'll move on straight into my comments and questions. So for general comments, I'd like to begin with a few reflections before moving to my questions. One, I found the opening of PNG's embassy in Jerusalem a powerful gesture, not just politically, but spiritually. It reflects our national identity as a Christian country, and I believe it's important that our foreign policy also speaks to our values. Two, PNG is the first Pacific Island nation to open an embassy in Jerusalem, and that's a bold move. It positions us as a regional leader in faith-driven diplomacy, but also invites scrutiny. And we must be ready to explain our stance clearly and confidently. And a comment on current conflict. At the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict. This is a deeply complex and emotional issue with humanitarian consequences. As a nation that values peace and justice, PNG must balance its spiritual solidarity with Israel and its moral responsibility to promote peace and dignity for all. Now on to my main questions. Mr. Henao, I'd like to ask, how is the current Israel-Palestine conflict affecting PNG's relationship with Israel, especially in terms of international perception and regional diplomacy? I'll let you answer it first before I move on to my next question. Thank you.
Sure. So Amy, the relationship with Israel is extremely robust. I accommodated the Pacific ambassador of Israel to Papua New Guinea during independence. We had the opportunity for Ambassador Roy to engage with different members of PNG's community. But I think more importantly, why did he come? He came because Bibi Netanyahu, his prime minister, instructed him to come and celebrate the 50th anniversary of our nation. So the ongoing support, the ongoing relationship that we've had since opening our embassy has been extremely supportive of Israel. I should also just clarify that we're not only the first Pacific nation, we're in fact the first Asia Pacific nation to have an embassy in Jerusalem. China doesn't have it, Singapore doesn't have it, Australia doesn't have it. Korea, Japan. So we are the first Asia Pacific nation to have an embassy in Jerusalem. So just to move on to your question on balancing the moral issues around the conflict of Israel, the important thing is this conflict is killing people. It's killing people, whether they are children, whether they are elderly, whether they are mothers. War is a horrible political system. What complicates this conflict is how is the war being prosecuted? How is the war being implemented? And again, I think it's important for folks like you to understand that war is a government policy, and it's a government policy implemented by a government agency. So if we look at October 7, the Hamas government of Gaza, they implemented a policy on October 7 to make border incursions in the south of Israel. And their government policy was very clear. We will murder and destroy many people as possible and kidnap them and bring them back to Gaza. So that was their government policy that Hamas implemented. We can go into the history and the reasons why they have that policy, but that was the first action that happened. The retaliation that happened in defending, trying to bring the hostages back, the government of Israel stated that as their objective, that they will embark on this policy. And the Israel Defense Force became the implementing agency to undertake that policy. So the question that has been in the minds of every single one of us from October 7 until today is, how is that government policy being implemented by Israel? But how has that government policy been implemented by Hamas? Now, because Israel is a stronger economy, is a stronger nation. It has integrated ties in its market defense relationship with America. The imposition that Israel has a higher burden of values becomes more strenuous, more scrutinized over Hamas. And so what I want to clearly state is when we get into the conversations on who is doing it right, who is doing it balanced, who has the moral clarity on the war, it's important to look at it through those two competing government and those two government policies and the implementers of those government policies. And I just want to highlight three things when we look at it through that lens. The first lens is Hamas does not have any strategy about the freedom and the rights that you and I believe in. Its charter is very clear that they are for the complete destruction of the nation of Israel and kill many Jews as they want. That is their stated government policy. There's no consideration of humanitarianism, human rights, basic rights, any level of moral decency that you and I believe in exercise. You then have the state of Israel that has similar rights and obligations as the Papua New Guinea Constitution. If we are to go and prosecute a war, we are going to be held accountable if we do the wrong things. We will be held accountable if we, prosecuted indiscriminately. So those sorts of systems that is in the state of Israel, it's inculcated in the Israel Defense Force, they become the hallmarks of their rules of engagement. before they go and bomb a particular area, and you probably would have seen this in the news, there'll be pamphlets distributed. The IDF will actually call people on their telephones in those buildings. You need to exit because we will blow that building up in 2 hours' time. There are even footages where the missile has left, but if they have identified a child in that vicinity, the missile will divert and explode into the sea. So the morality that exists in the IDF, and it doesn't mean they get it right every time. They also get it wrong, and lives are lost. And another stated policy in terms of rules of engagement with Hamas is that they actually put what's known as human shields. So right now, in the conquest of Gaza City, there are now talks that people have actually been put in front of the IDF to kill, while the terrorists are actually hiding underground. And that is a stated rules of engagement military objective that these nations have, Hamas has. So I think it's important that that's the number one balance that one needs to look at. And then just slightly elevating that up, Iran has been financing significant resources, billions and billions of dollars, into proxies against Israel, whether it's Hezbollah on the north, whether it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS in Iraq, or whether it's Hamas on the south. And so that second war that's been fought between Israel and Iran, that's more conventional. That's where planes and missiles of two nations fight and degrade each other in order to establish levels of security and dominance. So again, if you look at the moral balance in that, think about Iran as Australia, its implementing agency, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as DFAT, and DFAT is financing Hezbollah, DFAT is financing Gaza, and they're financing them not for schools, they're not financing them for hospitals, they're actually financing them for death and destruction. So again, the moral question is the type of aid, lethal aid that IGRC Iran implementing, is that good or is that not good? For the region, and of course the ambition of Iran with a nuclear weapon that further complicates whether their jihadi and destruction outlook should be an important member of the community having nuclear weapons. And then the final piece of that is the global terror and the global jihadi movement. So this is where my slides wanted to give you that indication that the global jihadi movement is now firmly embedded. It's now a fabric within the left coalition, and the left coalition are now promoting the jihadi movements. And primarily because the jihadi movement has successfully flipped the narrative away from a death cult into a anti-colonial movement. And that's why it's gaining massive notoriety in the West, because it's seen as a anti-colonial movement. They've been desperately trying to make Hamas leaders to be the Nelson Mandela. They've been desperately trying to make Palestinian leaders, the Mandela of the generation. But the difficulty with those sorts of narratives is we know that the stated objective of Hamas is the destruction of Israel. And one has to question whether the ANC and Nelson Mandela had a similar outlook for Afrikaans. But yes, Amy, that it's important to look at the conflict in Israel through those three lenses: a provincial lens on Hamas Israel, a regional lens of Iran, Israel, and then a global lens on the jihadi movement and the pro-Israel movement.
Yes, thank you, Mr. for the in-depth explanation and clarification. I will move on to my second question, which is the final one. Yes, we're gonna come back to our country, Papua New Guinea. How do we ensure that faith-based diplomacy remains inclusive and is respectful for PNG's religious diversity?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think the most important thing is what we're doing right now in Papua New Guinea. I am a Messianic, Gentile. I believe in, my faith is more aligned with, Jewish customs. Like tonight, I'll be celebrating the Shabbat. But there is absolute tolerance. My friends know that this evening I'll be having that time with my family. Even my own family members that are not in my community, they know that this is something that we can't go and disturb Douveri. How we arrive at that type of relationship, how we connect with that type of engagement, that in itself is a demonstration that we know how to balance each other. Now, do we need to legislate that? Do we need to devise a strategy around that? Probably at some time in the future we need to, in order to create safeguards. But the fact that we're already exercising that is a critical piece. However, let's not forget that we live in a democracy where people will go and lobby their interests. People will go and bring their ideas as a critical part of their exercise of being in Papua New Guinea. So my community went and lobbied the Prime Minister that we wanted the embassy in Jerusalem, and we connected with Christian communities that aligned with us, and we went forth to do that sort of engagement. And I think that's an important part of understanding faith-based policies, faith-based diplomacy, that the critical aspect of this is we already have dialogue systems. At a more systematic level, the Council of Churches brings together mainline churches, the body of Christ brings Pentecostal churches, and then they themselves talk to each other about matters of faith. So those sorts of systems are by and large operational, functional, and I definitely feel that the more that we engage in those areas, the more that we're going to create a strong community. However, if we use Australia and US as an example on polarization, we need to also get ready when we become differences of our views. If the mainline churches are more centrist, more left, if the Pentecostals are more radical right, then there will come a time when they will be pulled apart, and we need to find a way of bringing them back again, pulling apart, bringing again. But that's part of nation building. You can't change that. It is what we have to live through, and how we drive that as a tool of change is going to largely depend on how much we actually make that value system responsive to our development aspirations. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. So before I finish, I want to make a general comment about the signing of treaties and implementing of foreign policies. I believe young people should be part of the conversations. We are the next generation of leaders, communicators, and citizens. If we are not involved in shaping foreign policy now, we'll be left reacting to decisions made without us. That's all from my end. Thank you again for sharing your experience, Mr. Henao, and I also appreciate your time and leadership in these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Mr. Henao. We move on to our next attendee, Jonathan Siba. Please go ahead, Jonathan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Henao.
Hi,
Can
Jonathan.
everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. Okay, so I have 3 questions and 3 comments. I'll start off with the questions and then I'll follow them up. After a response, I'll follow them with my comments because the comments are sort of linked to my questions. First of all, thank you for a very insightful and interesting presentation. I think a lot of us, apart from watching the news, don't really have an in-depth understanding of the dynamics of this conflict and what's happening over there, and how faith and religion does play a big part in dictating the different sides that nations are choosing. Now, my first question is in relation to something you had mentioned at the start of your presentation. Are you able to elaborate further on how domestic systems are prioritized over international consensus? And are you able to give an example?
Did we lose Jonathan?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I got your first question. What's your second question?
Okay, my second question is, with PNG opening the embassy in Jerusalem, what implications does this action have from the viewpoint of Islamic states? And does this have any economic or political implications for PNG with our possible bilateral relations with these Islamic states?
Yeah, and your final question?
And my final question is in relation to the fulcrum method, I guess, that you have suggested to the government. So alliance swings based on national view. So as a professional working in the field, do you believe that it must be these national interests must also be reflective of domestic governance and politics? And how can an international, how does a country like PNG separate its own national interests from international consensus?
Yeah, great questions. All right, so let me start off with the domestic system and the international system. A classical example is the slide that I mentioned about the view of the Marape government about Jerusalem versus the view of the foreign policy, the foreign affairs officers about Jerusalem. So it was very clear that the domestic system of Judeo-Christian values, it looked at Jerusalem as a holy city, as a city of Jesus, as a city of the Messiah, God's city. That is where the embassy, that's where the Kumu flag has to fly. Whereas the international view was that Jerusalem is a disputed area, and the advice that was coming from former ambassadors of New York and others around the world, where they viewed the 1967 borders or even the 1948 borders was where Jerusalem was divided into an Arab and a Jewish state. And then in 1967, after the Six-Day War, there was a further division done based on the conquest of Israel unifying Jerusalem. And so the point I'm trying to highlight here, Jonathan, is that irrespective of what the UN negotiations, mandates, provisions were on international consensus, the cabinet made a very clear view that we're rejecting all of these dialogues, and we're going forward, and we're having an embassy in Jerusalem, which we define as the State of Israel's capital. So that's an example of domestic systems prevailing over international systems. Your second question on implications of Islamic states, that would have been a major challenge for us 20, 30 years ago, when there was still immense hostilities with the State of Israel and Arab nations. But when Donald Trump executed the Abrahamic Accords in his first presidency term, he invoked that particular treaty brought in normalizations with Bahrain, Morocco, the United Arab Emirates, and it also put in the winds of other economies as well. So your question on does this impact other Islamic states, the ones that really matter to us, like the United Arab Emirates to a large extent? The answer is probably no, because they themselves have already normalized relationships with Israel. We do a lot of our commercial and people-to-people relations with UAE. So I would rank UAE as probably the first Arab state that it would be interesting what the impacts would be. And again, I've been to Dubai, and having seen Israelis coming there and the trade happening with the UAE, it's increased exponentially. So those moderate nations actually have a strong engagement relationship. We're also seeing changes happening in sworn enemies of Israel in Lebanon, in Syria. When Hezbollah was completely destroyed, the Lebanese government are now moving towards a closer relationship with Israel. In Syria, we saw the interim president beginning to look at normalizations with Israel. So there is a lot of transformation happening. The way in which Israel prosecuted Iran's 12-day war, it's changed a lot of outlook on Israel. Even with the bombing of what they did in Qatar a couple of days ago, that has by and large not changed fundamentally the relationship and the interest of Israel. And probably it's a good point to reference that as much as these nations are sophisticated, we read about it every day, but their mentality is still one of the Bible. They, Donald Trump's and borrowing it from Ronald Reagan, peace through strength is a prevailing force in the Middle East. If you demonstrate that you're able to hurt your enemies will respect you. And that's exactly the sort of environment that we're seeing prevail in the Middle East. Your final question on the fulcrum and the usage of the fulcrum to pursue its objectives, and where does that situate with international consensus? My simple view of this matter is PNG's national interest is PNG's national interest. We have to pursue it even if the international consensus tells us not to, because that's a judgment call that a nation state has to make. There are things that we would naturally have international consensus on things like the Geneva Convention, things like, environmental rules. But then there are other things that we can't have international consensus on. For example, if there are nations that their nationals are bringing in harmful drugs, harmful things that are destroying us, we can't have the rules applied to these people. They need to be prosecuted. So striking the balance on what we can work with, what we cannot work with, that's an important national interest conversation that we have to define. And that's why I'm excited to speak to each and every one of you, because you are the ones that will help us define national interest. It's not going to be the policymakers. Your papers will define us. Your research will help define this is a national interest of Papua New Guinea based on these factors, based on these features. And then it's a question like any other democracy. Where do we influence the fulcrum to swing in order to achieve what you've observed? So I would say that the national interest, it needs to be manufactured and designed by us. We need to be in the front seat on executing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henao. I just have 2 comments to make. So the first is in relation to the fulcrum method or approach. I think it can also be applicable to other sections in P or parts of PNG's political setup and the various institutions, because our politics is very volatile in the sense that there's always change in political leadership. And with the change comes a change in priorities and interests as well. So I feel that this fulcrum approach is really suited for PNG, as it allows us a certain extent of flexibility when it comes to dealing with like politics and other politics and other issues of national interest that often they fall victim to political leadership and who the party of the day. My second comment, I really like at the start of your presentation, you mentioned how this mentioned something about how the left and right views have permeated global context, from a global context. And after discussing question 1, where you elaborated on the domestic systems and how they play into international consensus, I have a clear understanding of how that, as you said, permeates through throughout the global audience, because their global consensus is able to provide dialogue for different countries and different nationalities to relate to the bigger issue itself, or the conflict between Israel and the right. Just my final comment. When you mentioned, or you kept highlighting in your presentation, how this jihadist movement in the Middle East is considered a type of decolonization, or can be classed as decolonization. I feel for a country like Papua New Guinea, we can the idea of jihadism as a sense of removing ourselves from the West, it can be applied for us as well. But I think our own financial constraints are what's stopping us from thinking outside that box in terms of what we can do to help decolonize ourselves from the bigger system. But yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Mr. Henao. We move on to Zola.
All right, thank you, Mr. Yegiora. Yes, my name is Zola Yanangwa. I am a final year communication arts student. And without further ado, I'll go straight into making my comments and asking my 3 questions. So from my understanding, traditional diplomacy focuses on state-to-state political and economic negotiations between established institutions, whereas faith-based diplomacy incorporates religious concerns as part of the solution to mediate conflicts, build understanding and promote reconciliation in areas where traditional tools are insufficient. So an example of faith-based diplomacy, as you mentioned in your presentation, was incorporated when PNG and the Israeli government had jointly opened a new embassy in Jerusalem on the 5th of September 2023. So in an official statement, Prime Minister Marape stated that the decision of opening PNG's embassy in Jerusalem was in acknowledgement to our Judeo-Christian worldview that Jerusalem is historically the headquarters of the nation and the people of Israel. And in my opinion, in addition to this, in 2024, another significant event was when Pope Francis decided to visit Papua New Guinea as part of his 45th apostolic journey. So this marked the 3rd time a Pope has visited Papua New Guinea. And the Pope's visit actually reaffirms the country's identity as a Christian nation. So yes, moving on to the 3 questions that I'd like to ask. In PNG, where Christianity is deeply woven into the national identity, faith often guides leaders in promoting unity, compassion, and moral responsibility in their policies and actions. So my first question is, how much influence does religion have on the leadership style of Papua New Guinea's political leaders? My second question is, can religious background significantly impact political decision-making in Papua New Guinea? And my third question is, in the context of PNG's democratic governance and Christian national identity, how does the state ensure religious pluralism and protect the rights of non-Christian communities in the country?
Yeah. Thank you, Zola. So to answer your first question on religion and impacting PNG leadership, you know, I think like everyone on this call, and you know, your friends included, we all come from a Judeo-Christian community. Every village has a church, every church has a Bible, and perhaps on rare occasions throughout life, things may change and you may subscribe to something different. But the fundamental prevailing value is there is this inherent link between Christian upbringing and your worldview. So James Marape is no different to that. He's like me, he's like you and others, that his worldview is constructed in his upbringing. And you know, the son of a preacher man, that obviously, you know, indicates that a lot of those sorts of virtues would be a big part of his leadership role. Again, even if we look at Michael Samare, there was a lot of Catholicism in his leadership, his values. Even when we look at Peter O'Neill, he had a lot of those Lutheran type, you know, outlook that he had. So, and again, you see this manifesting right throughout the public service as well. There are departmental secretaries that, you know, have Christian prayer sessions. I know one particular department, every, I think, Wednesdays, there's an intercom that they share the word, they pray, and they carry on. Like, people stop for 10, 15 minutes, and that happens. So to answer your question, we still have that type of leadership prevalent right across the country. It does inform their outlook, it does inform where where they see themselves moving forward. Is that a good thing or not a good thing? I think it's a fantastic question that you and your colleagues should investigate. We often hear that this is the season of the SDAs. Their prime minister's SDA. Many of the departmental heads are SDAs. So it's SDA all over. Is that a good thing or not a good thing? I don't know. I honestly don't know. When Sir Michael was in power, it was the time of the Catholics. It was the time of the Cipics. So I guess the key thing here is history would be a good identifier if that was actually a good thing for the country. I can honestly say that has it created an environment of animosity? Has it created an environment of discrimination? Probably not, but it does create an environment that you do need to have a particular worldview if you need to have engagements with the political leadership. In terms of your second question, and please correct me, I've got it down here. Religious background impacting Papua New Guinea. Was that your inquiry?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah, look, this is a really good question. And what you're effectively pointing out is too much religion a distraction and an impact on the PNG project? I would actually bring that inquiry further into sectors of PNG's development. Is too much religion, and paraphrasing this, is too much religion in the economy good for the economy or not good for the economy? Is too much religion in the social construct good for the economy, good for nation building or not good for nation building? It's too much religion in security good for PNG or not good for PNG? So if you look at it in those three governmental lens, let's start off with national security. Judeo-Christian values and national security, I think, is uncompromised. We're a nation that enjoys our freedom because of Judeo-Christian values. Those Judeo-Christian values manifested into our constitution. If there was another value system, for example, China, that would come and impact the stability of those Judeo-Christian values, then that's a national security issue. Or it could be even Australia imposing their left-wing ideals, the Labour government's left-wing ideals, into our social cohesion models. That would be a major problem. Or if there was an influx of Indians or Chinese that would completely upend our our national security. So that would be a marker of saying that probably the right type of religion imbues us that we must remain in a Western-led values, and national security has to be aligned with nations that have Western values. Now, when it comes to economics, and that's where fundamentally I have a lot of differences with the current government. Marape knows my views on his big socialist agenda on big government, and having too many public servants and not having the market to drive and make those sorts of corrections. And I stand by those values because of my Judeo-Christian values promotes the right of the individual, the pursuit of the individual. I want to be responsible for creating my own wealth. I want to be responsible for getting much of my own wealth that I create to transform my family, my relatives, and my community. I don't want to give half of my wealth away to a third party like the government, that they are going to do all those things for me. So again, just to give you some perspective, those of you that will be entering employment, if you earn 70,000 kina to 250,000 kina as a base salary, you will be giving 42% away every fortnight to the government of Papua New Guinea, in the pursuit that the government of Papua New Guinea will do something magical to make your life better. I've been paying taxes for 25 years. I got married, 15 years ago. I have never used a public service for my children or my family in terms of health and education. And certainly my mom and dad never got me to consume that. So for me, a 42% tax every fortnight, it's not going to me and the enhancement of my family. It's to the larger community. So I'm illustrating that in the sense that my religious beliefs on the pursuit of happiness as an individual and my family, that's a sort of religion, if you want for a better word, that I would want to exercise. But there's another type of religion where sharing out and having a big government to share everything is a good thing. So that's where the economics conversation is always a very elastic conversation. And then finally, on the social sector constructs, again, your generation is going to be completely different from mine. If there is a high tolerance that you do want, openness on LGBTQI, you do want, movements of affirmative actions and things like that, then that's something we need to hear from you directly, and we need to connect with you, because too much religion will suffocate your generation's aspirations on having the very things that you want. And you would want to upend us so that your generation has that direction going forward. So I would encourage you to look at it through those lens of social sector, economic sector, and national security sector about the applications of religion. I think your last question, and correct me, is about state and people that are not believers, that are not Christians, and the impact of their rights.
Yes, how does the state protect them?
Our constitution is very clear on the protection of freedom of expression, which is effectively what you're inquiring on. The obligation of the state is anyone can have an exercise of religion, of faith, but it also guides the exercise of that faith and that belief through pieces of legislation. So just to give you an example, and I do apologize if this is graphic. Sodomy is a criminal, it's a punishment under the criminal code of Papua New Guinea. It's a serious offense. Apologies, do all of you know what sodomy means? Okay, I'll just try and explain it in a very plain manner. It's basically having sexual intercourse with the same sex, but specifically sodomy is male-to-male sex. So under the criminal code, that is illegal in Papua New Guinea. It's an indictable offense. It's almost identical to killing somebody or doing an armed robbery. It's a very high criminal offense. Now, that's an example where Also, prostitution is a crime as well. And so that particular law on sodomy instantly negates any relationship of LGBTQI community in PNG, particularly the male to male sex. And you also have other pieces of legislation that negate other practices as well. So to answer your question, the Constitution safeguards freedoms of expression. Several pieces of legislation restricts particular parts of expression. And again, that's really going to be on the onus of those communities on how they would want to change and upend those provisions. Yep. Thank you, Sola.
Thank you, Mr. Henao, for your response to my questions.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you once again, and we move on to Stella Mari.
Thank you, Mr. Yagira, for giving me this opportunity to ask my questions. Good afternoon, Mr. Henao, Mr. Ako, and everyone else. So I have 2 questions to ask based on Mr. Henao's presentation. So the first question is, can you elaborate on what the global jihad movement is all about? You can answer the question and then I'll move on to the second one.
Sure. So the global jihad movement has its residence and foundation in the interpretation of the Islamic faith. And primarily it is from a branch where it's effectively promoting the colonization of the Islamic faith in a global setting. So you will hear a lot of interpretations of the Quran, which is the holy book of the Muslims. It derives it from this particular scripture that makes them want to colonize or create a caliphate. That's the word. That's the word they use on creating Islamic communities. So what that follows is the movement of jihadism is a movement on trying to defeat, upend the infidel. The infidel are people that do not subscribe to Islam. And how they intend to achieve that is either violently doing it or going into communities, in the West and elsewhere, and imposing the Sharia law or the Muslim law in those communities. And the whole idea is to use that particular strategy to then start disrupting and removing Western values and replacing it with Islamic values. But the jihad is basically it's interpreted as a call. It's a call to defeat the infidel, to cleanse the lands of the infidel, and to replace it entirely with Sharia law and Muslim virtues and values, and therefore creating a caliphate. Why does this have a connection to the left? Why does this have a connection to intersectionality, to critical race theory, to, why are so many people in the West allured to the global jihad movement? Because this is a system that they believe that destroying Western systems is a common value that they have in replacing Western values with a more harmonious community. And unfortunately, what they don't realize is jihad by its very nature is not designed to live harmoniously. It's got to be their rule and their rule alone. So that's where much of the challenge is. And obviously, the Christians that do not agree with that, they're the ones that are constantly fighting their wantoks in the West, that you're useful idiots believing these people actually want to be living in peace with you. But that is the fundamental foundation of the jihad movement.
Thank you for your answer. Now on to the second one. What are the specific values of the Judeo-Christian values that makes it to be the foundation of the conservative movement?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the pursuit of individual freedom is the foundation. For example, I believe that by having Shabbat tonight, I will be free in talking to God with my family. I will be able to spend time with them, and I will be able to spend resources with them to live a life that's meaningful. Because my Judeo-Christian beliefs is that that's enhancing my personal growth as a good person in this world, and I will go to heaven and have my salvation based on that. You know, Christian values, that Jewish values, Christian values. So the foundation is the pursuit of your freedom, your happiness, and your connection with God to live a meaningful life. If people take away that right from you, if governments take that right away from you, even if companies and universities take that right away from you, then, you know, you need to live in a country where you can exercise recourse, you can exercise and express that you don't agree with why this has been taken away from you. So all of this is what the Judeo-Christian values is all about. There are institutions that allow you to question authority, allow you to exercise authority, allow you to prosper. And so it all comes back to that shared value, that the pursuit of someone's dream, their vision, their freedom is permitted in a country, in a community, in a society. Does that make sense? Sorry, Stella, are you still online?
I think we still has an issue with connectivity.
Sorry, I
Okay.
had a network
Alright.
issue, but thank you for your answer.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, you're welcome.
Okay, Stella, I'm Tasola. All right, then we.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Stella. Then, as per my announcement in the chat function, we'll move on to those who have questions. Unfortunately, time has caught up with us, and Mr. Henao is a very, very busy man, including Mr. Ako. So we have them only for 2 hours. So Our time is running out, so those of you who have questions, comments, we'll give you priority in our next session next week. And we'll move on to, or we'll give this time to Mr. Ako to say something, and then we'll conclude with Zola saying thank you on behalf of the class to Mr. Henao. Mr. Ako, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Egira and Mr. Henao for such, as usual, I always work towards listening to your knowledge and your expertise in this type of situations, which are not just theory-based. You experience a lot of this stuff which you are talking about. And also to Mr. Egira for these opportunities, and to the rest of the class for allowing this process to happen. And also this particular lecture, the faith-based diplomacy one was very important, and we got the appropriate person to give this idea to us. I mean, give the talk to us on what he thinks about the topic. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for that, and it gives us more additional knowledge in terms of why this is so. So now, from now onwards, when we start watching the news on CNN or ABC, and people start talking, we start having debates on it, we know why we have this national interest. Okay, so like I mentioned this week, it goes back to the national interest versus our personal convictions. So I'll end it then. Thank you once again to everyone, and good luck. Thanks, Mr. Egira.
Thank you, Mr. Ako. Zola, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Egira. First of all, yes, thank you to Mr. Henao for your thought-provoking presentation and your insightful responses, not only to my questions, but to those of my peers as well. So on behalf of the PNG and International Studies, as well as the Communication Arts final year students of Divine University, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to you for generously sharing your time and your wealth of experience with us. Yes, your contributions to PNG's legal, economic, and policy landscape is truly inspiring. So we are grateful for the opportunity to learn from professionals like yourself, as well as Mr. Ako and Mr. Egira. Once again, thank you to all of you three for inspiring the next generation of leaders.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zola. Mr. Henao, you want to make any closing remarks before I close up the session? The
Yeah,
floor is yours.
Thank you, Bernard. Look, I just want to congratulate all of you for participating in this program. I think it's critical that you have the opportunity to hear what practitioners do, and it informs you on your curiosity about PNG, its development, its international relations. I hope you don't mind. I just want to give a plug on some of my products that are coming out, which I know that many of you would find a lot of usefulness. I do have a podcast. Hopefully, some of the content will start moving out into social media. A lot of people that I'm interviewing are fascinating in the international relations space. I do have two types of formats on it. One is a current affairs type conversation. The other one, which I think would be useful to a lot of you, is the longer format on biographies. So there are upstanding Papua New Guineans where, in fact, Lahui and I do this together, where we interview people like Sir Robert, Dame Jean, and years of their experience in the public sector in the foreign policy space. The second piece, just very quickly to everybody, my NGO, Waigani Yerushalayim Center. Yerushalayim is the Hebrew version of Jerusalem. We look at promoting dialogue around the PNG-Israel relationship, political relationship that is. So there's a number of forums that we'll be doing right throughout the next couple of months. I'll definitely post that on my LinkedIn, and everyone is welcome to come and participate. The one that's probably on the horizon, and unfortunately we can't make this virtual, but it'll be an Israel update for educators in Moresby, around about 18th, 19th of October. But I do encourage you, just follow my page and you'll see much of these activities out there. Thank you again, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that brings us to the end of our presentation. For this semester, we've decided to take a different approach by including this particular topic, just to keep the conversation going, but include how faith and religion comes in and how it plays into foreign policy. And so far, it's been working well. We've been having other discussions apart from the one that we've just had, and we hope to continue the topic next year, next semester. So we might send you an invite again to say something again next semester when we run our unit or teach our unit again online. So this unit has been fully delivered online using the Moodle platform, and Mr. Ako, based in Port Moresby, has dedicated his time and shared his knowledge with us, and we are grateful for that. And we're also grateful that you've accepted the invite and came on board, and you've shared your crystal clear analysis and explanation. It has really broadened our understanding, and not only broaden but deepen, help us to think critically about our country and where we're heading and how each of us will contribute towards nation building and improve our place in the world. So thank you very much for your time once again, and I thank all the students as well, and including Mr. Ako. We'll keep the conversation going, and definitely will follow you at the Legacy Group, and the content that you are creating is also very enriching. So we'll keep a lookout there for more content. If that's all, thank you, Drew. Please, Ogara. Have
Thank
a
you.
pleasant afternoon and happy Sabbath.
Shabbat shalom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Thank you, everyone. School good. Bye.
Okay, thank you.